Or you can make Terry.
This meeting is being recorded.
Yeah, I don't know where it's being saved though. That could be a challenge. Hang on.
I think it will send you an email.
It's probably going to be on the cloud somewhere on Zoom.
Yeah, I chose the cloud, but I don't know where on the cloud it'll go. All right. Anyways, I'll try to find it after the meeting's over. But so you've got my email. Your mom, you said, has a visa already to Canada. Is that correct? So she can enter as a visitor. I don't think she's going to have any problems doing that. For visitors, this applies generally to all visitors. The default period of time that they could be here for is 6 months, unless they're granted less time. Most often, you don't even speak to an officer anymore. When you land at the airport, you go through, the kiosks, and you're granted entry, and the default is 6 months. So I expect that's what's going to happen with your mom as well. So I guess in terms of options afterwards, it will really depend on what her intentions are. We can certainly, and she should, do an extension to her status before it expires. So, at the 5-month mark, filing an in-Canada extension to the visitor status would be required. As a visitor, she's got to show that she can financially afford to be here without working, because she's not going to be able to work. And so that support can be her own, so savings and things like that, or it can be from anybody else, like yourselves, who are funding that the time that she spends in Canada. That's only going to be temporary, though, so it's going to be temporary extensions until either they say no or she wants to go home. In terms of permanent options, the humanitarian really is probably the only way that's going to work. We can always talk about whether there's economic immigration options, for example, for skilled workers, things like that, but it's a points-based, invitation-based system. Age has a lot to do with the chances of being selected and so on. If that's something you want to discuss, we certainly can, but Prashant had asked me about a refugee application, and I said that those really, to be a refugee, you have to be personally targeted for what's called a convention ground. So you're being persecuted for some reason, like your political opinion or nationality or gender, things like that. If it's an issue of the country generally is at war, that unfortunately won't make someone a refugee in Canada. That's why I had suggested the humanitarian application, which is much broader. It looks at risk in the context of hardship of having to go back, and generalized risks are fine, whereas for a refugee application, generalized risks won't work. It has to be particular to the person. So in terms of a humanitarian application, it's quite broad. They'll look at hardships of returning back to one's home country, what that hardship looks like, whether that hardship exists throughout the country, what ties there are to Canada, what establishments has happened in Canada. If there are children whose best interests are affected, they would be considered. So it's a global assessment really of whether this exceptional remedy should be used to grant somebody permanent residence in Canada. So it's not meant just for exceptional circumstances, but it isn't a normal pathway to integrate. So there is some level of, there's a threshold of hardship that has to be shown, and there's no magic amount. It's a discretionary application that an officer will review to say, yes, this is something that we want to alleviate someone from having to face these if they go back, and therefore we're going to grant the application. Usually these applications take about 18 months to 2 years to process, and they work in 2 stages. The first stage is to say, yes, we're going to accept your application on humanitarian grounds. That's stage 1. And once that happens, stage 2 is more admissibility. So it deals with like medical exams, criminality, security checks, things like that, to make sure you're not inadmissible to Canada. And if those all pass, then the person becomes a permanent resident. But the first stage is the hard part to get past.
Mm-hmm. And quick question, and maybe you were planning to cover it. Will she be able to work legally while she's doing this now? Okay.
No. So until stage 1, there's no entitlement to, or there's no way to apply for a work permit within the humanitarian process. If she wants a work permit outside of that, the way it works is she'd have to find an employer willing to go through the process of getting permission to hire a foreign worker. So that involves demonstrating that they've recruited for a Canadian, they can't find any qualified Canadian citizens or permanent residents, and only then will the company get approval to offer the position to a foreign worker. At that point, you would have to make a work permit application. and show that she's qualified for whatever the job is. And then once the work permit's approved, then she could work.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it can be, and there's no healthcare coverage, for example. She's unlikely to be able to get a driver's license without a work permit, or without a work permit. So there are real life implications of being here just as a visitor long term, which there's simply no way around until the humanitarian reaches a certain stage, the first stage, approval. Now, it may very well be that they put into place policies to expedite decisions for people from Ukraine. I don't know. That's not been announced yet. But everything that, all the messaging that's been put out there seems quite facilitative to speed up at least processes for people coming, not so much for people who are here already and what they're, whether they're going to expedite or prioritize those applications. But that could very well happen as well. And if that does, then we might have a decision much faster.
Mm-hmm. And from your experience in our current state, do you think we won't have any problem after, waiting for 18 months? Do you think it will most likely be approved, or it's hard to speculate? Of course, you can't really, say, but from your experience, just on average, do you think this kind of application will be successful, do you think?
Based on what's happening right now, yes. But if it is going to take 18 months, then I think the question is, what is the situation going to look like in 18 months? So are all the problems that exist today, if they still exist in 18 months, and I would say yes, the chances are good, right? If not, no, I know, but if not, like if this is resolved much sooner, say in the next 2 months, this is over and things start getting back to normal at some level, then it stops being as compelling to allow her to stay here, right? And be given permanent status. So I think it really will depend on when the application is assessed as to whether the hardship can be established. The other thing they look at is ties to Canada specifically. So are there any ties? Like you guys aren't here, is there anything else?
Just through me.
Okay.
And we're married now, and she's
Yeah.
my mom, obviously.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
mother-in-law felt like I'm a Canadian citizen, but I don't live in Canada anymore. I have non-resident status in Canada.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the only tie.
So I think the ties to Canada are pretty weak, but I think, like I mentioned in my email, it would be trying to spin it as, the ties here might be weak, but the reason we're doing this in Canada is because she has no way to go to the US, I assume. And, or, if you're contemplating some kind of application to get her to the US, then we would have to put in an explanation of why she should be getting permanent residence in Canada. Or if there's nothing possible, for example, then something from a US immigration lawyer, for example, to say that there is no pathway for her to immigrate to the US at the present time. So just eliminating those options to say Canada really is the only place that she can be, and she's close to family if she's allowed to stay here.
Well, she's been denied in tourist visa to come to the US twice already during Trump administration.
Mm-hmm.
And the wait time to even get an appointment for a tourist visa, the shortest that Terry could find was in Canada, and it was 120 days.
Yeah.
Here in the US, or sorry, in Mexico, where she is right now, it's 500 days. Or
520 days in the Mexico City US consulate embassy. And I think in Canada, like similar to in many countries or many cities, except for Calgary. Calgary is 120 days.
Is that the fastest?
That's the fastest that have been able to find in Canada. Yeah.
And that's for a tourist visa, but I think the other question is, are there any possibilities for her to immigrate to the US, by way of a sponsorship or something like that? And if there isn't, putting in information to show that there isn't such an option, if you're both there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've been looking at that. We actually consulted with a local US lawyer, immigration attorney, and the best way to do it is to be in the US and then apply for asylum. But she cannot get to the US because she is not
Not asylum, I'm talking about a family sponsorship. So sponsoring her as your parent.
None of us are citizens. I'm still on a green card. I applied for citizenship, but the wait time is like...
It's going to be another year for her.
Another year for me.
And then another maybe 2 years after that for her mom.
Yeah.
So so you have to get, maybe the same lawyer can give you a letter that just says, as a permanent resident or green card holder, you're not eligible to sponsor your parents. And putting in documents to show the wait times to get your citizenship, and then ultimately what the process would be to sponsor her to the US. What wait times are, I don't know if it's like a lottery like it was, like it is. I really don't know what the process involves, whether you can just apply to sponsor a parent. There's no wait times. In Canada, it's a lottery system for Canadians or permanent residents to sponsor their parents. And permanent residents can, in Canada, sponsor parents to immigrate. So that's why I brought it up, because I thought if it's possible here, it might be possible in the US as well. But if we can put in some stuff to show that it's not, then we can certainly say that's the reason why Canada.
So quick question, she is in Mexico right now, and we extended her stay there, but it sounds like it's better for her to fly to Canada as soon as possible in order to start the application, while it's still a very current and very obviously important matter in terms of people who are Ukrainians. And would your recommendation be to be in Canada as soon as possible, or do you think it's okay for her to fly in like 1 month from today or something? I don't know, because that's what
I don't know that it ultimately matters whether it's today or in a month. It does take a good amount of time to put a good application together. So, support letters from friends and family, support letters from family you might still have in Ukraine, talking about how terrible, it's obvious from the news, but support letters from individuals who are related to you or close friends is important, because they're very similar to what you would face if you went back. Her own personal statement explaining why she doesn't want to go back. So there's a lot to put together before the application itself is filed. So it's, I would say it will take at least for us to do it about a month to do it, and she won't be able to get this filed until she comes here. So this is not possible unless she's in Canada. So, but again, a month. If things are going to go all the way back to normal in a month, then I don't think we're going to be having this discussion anyway. But if not, then I don't think that is going to make a tremendous difference. Ultimately, it'll be what is the situation at the time that the application looked at. So we're sort of speculating on what that might be anyway.
Okay. And then in terms of your fees, could you give us a little bit more perspective on that?
Typically an H&C or a humanitarian application, you're looking at about $7,500 in legal fees. What would be extra are application fees or costs generally. So if translations are required, government application fees, things we have to pay third parties essentially would be extra, and GST would be extra, so 5% tax. Yeah.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
Great. So from what you can see now, and if you could take us on and stuff and help us out, what would be the next steps for her then?
So we can certainly get started on opening a file and working on the supporting documents and so on, even before she arrives. And that might be something to consider, so that as soon as she is here, we can get that application filed as soon as possible. Everything now is filed online, so it's not a matter of, I don't need her physically here to do anything. So signatures happen through a portal. All the supporting documents get uploaded through the portal, so I don't need originals of anything really. So we can certainly get started on that. We can get a file opened, a retainer agreement to you, and then we'll send you a list of a questionnaire essentially to get all of the information that we need from her. There's a lot of details that we need, like her employment history, her address history, like there's a lot of personal details that we need. So if we can start working on that to populate the form, that's what's quite often very time consuming. So we can get moving on that and then file it as soon as it's ready to go.
Okay, and so obviously, like some of her documents and I guess Vita's documents are like in Ukraine or like through people who are not contactable for obvious reasons. Do you think that's going to hinder the application in any way, or?
Everything's going to have to be translated, so we can arrange for the documents to be translated. So if it's like birth certificates,
Right. So what I'm saying is like if we're not able
Ukraine.
to, the documents are in Ukraine and like we can't.
Oh, they're not available. Okay. Depending on what the risk always is, because these initial screenings for completeness happens with clerks who don't turn their mind to explanation sometimes of why something's not available. So there's always a risk that something gets bounced if it's not provided and it's a required document. For example, a birth certificate, just throwing that out there. But for a humanitarian application, there isn't a lot that is mandatory. Like the passport's mandatory, she's going to have to get us photos. But the rest of it is really documents that we come up with in terms of how do we establish or prove this claim to make it as strong as possible. So those are all fabricated. And so they would be from individuals, letters of support, all the news articles and research. We would do a country brief on what's happening. So there's a lot that can be put in. It's just a mandatory document if something is missing. What we usually do is upload an explanation of why it's missing. But the risk always is that some idiot who's not looking and not turning their mind to reality just says, no, it's incomplete, so we're returning it. So we can certainly try to deal with that if and when it happens, should it even happen. But if not, then we'll just sub that document with just an explanation saying, here's why it's not available.
Great. And then give us some hope and optimism here. So once we go through the process, 18 months have passed, we get an approval, she's approved. So then she can start working immediately, right? And
she would have to apply for a work permit. So once you get the stage 1 approval, you're entitled to apply for an open work permit, it's called. So it's open meaning unrestricted to the occupation and the job, like the location. There's no restrictions. You can work pretty well anywhere for anyone in any occupation. So she can apply for that once she gets stage 1 approval on the humanitarian application. And then once the work permit's actually issued, then she could work.
Great. And then another one, asking for a friend. So people who are in Ukraine right now, obviously they cannot apply, they cannot even leave the country. Women can, men can't, between 18 to 60 years old. But they do want to immigrate to Canada, and what would be the best way for them once they're able to leave the country? Is it
well, if they want to come temporarily, then the visitor visa would be the fastest way to get here, right? And once here, they can contemplate other options such as the humanitarian application. If they are skilled workers so generally from abroad, if you're trying to immigrate directly, you're restricted to the skilled worker class application. So it's a points-based system where you're assessed for your language, your education, your skilled work experience, age, all those kinds of things. And there's 2 different point systems. You have to meet the skilled worker points, first of all. If you pass those, then you can create a profile. It's called under Express Entry, which is our selection system for economic immigrants. And under Express Entry, they would be assigned a different set of points based on all those factors. And if their points are high enough on the next round of invitation, then they would be invited to apply for permanent residence. So there's a whole bunch of factors that go into, saying what options there might be for people. But generally, that's how economic immigration from abroad would work. If they're wanting to work here on a work permit, again, they're going to have to arrange that job offer first, and the employer is going to have to go through all of the approval requirements before they can even apply for a work permit. So if they're looking to leave quickly, then I think a visitor application is the fastest. But otherwise, it's, the humanitarian ones here or economic from abroad.
Okay. And one more question here. So I've heard that once you're in this crazy war state and you finally get out of the country, that's the first country where you can ask for asylum. And then would Canada look at the country that you first got in, because they still need to get to Canada, most likely from Poland or Germany, depends where they, or Romania, I don't know, Moldova. Does it matter for Canada if, it's not, Canada is not the first country that they get to from the war? Because
well, but asylum is a different question, right? So there is an expectation that if you go to a third country, that the first safe country you arrive in is the place that you ask for asylum. So if they come to Canada and make an asylum claim, that certainly will be a question of why didn't you make a claim in Poland, for example. So they would have to provide some justification for that. If it's just a matter of I'm in Poland temporarily but applying for a Canadian visitor visa, then that's the asylum issue is not a question really. If they are in the process of an asylum claim in Poland, then their chances of getting a Canadian visa are pretty well non-existent because they're working through a process in Poland. If they get approved for their asylum claim in Poland, then resettling to Canada would only be possible if they had sponsors here, a group of 5 sponsors, and they could only be sponsored once they are recognized refugees, and they would have to demonstrate that there's no durable or permanent solution for them in Poland or whatever country that they're in. So Canada won't resettle if there is some kind of solution permanently for somebody elsewhere, even as refugees.
okay, got it.
Makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
And so obviously this is all at the federal level. Is there anything provincial that we need to think about in terms of where she would be staying, in which province?
Not immigration related that I can unless you have specific questions. I think, like I said, she won't have access to healthcare. She won't be able to get a provincial driver's license. I'm sure she's got her international driver. I don't know. Maybe she has her international driver's license, but those are the two main things that tend to affect people on a day-to-day basis: is the lack of a license and lack of healthcare. So those are what they are. But in terms of where she's living, it truly doesn't matter for a humanitarian application. Usually people go where they might know somebody. So if she has any connections in Canada, like friends even, that would be where she likely will stay, and that would help in terms of the humanitarian application, because we could put in evidence about a support network here. Even if it's not family, you know, there are people in the community that can help her or are helping her.
Okay.
And then in terms of where we file for her case, because in the US, each department or each location, like in California, for instance, San Francisco is considered to be the most easy to get in.
There's no jurisdiction issues here. So it's a federal application. So Canada immigration is Canada immigration. So it doesn't matter. It's all humanitarian applications are processed at a number of different offices, but they redistribute based on workload and things. So we don't get to decide where to apply. It's internally decided.
Okay. And so you mentioned no health coverage. Obviously, that means we'll probably need to acquire health insurance for her, or is that a requirement?
That would be the safe thing to do, because if you didn't have it and something did happen that you would need medical care, that would be out of pocket otherwise. It's not a requirement to have medical insurance. It's just a matter of having that security, right? Should something happen. I think you probably get some coverage on a credit card for a brief period of time, maybe a few months. But I think that coverage is quite limited. So if you did want to look into further health insurance, travel health insurance, that would be wise.
Okay.
I don't think it's as crazy as healthcare bills in the US for the uninsured, but it can add up here as well.
Yeah. And then, you know, you've mentioned that obviously there are legal fees. So for people who will be trying to get a tourist visa from Ukraine right now to get to Canada and to file for humanitarian, I wonder if it makes sense for just one person, especially that men are not even allowed to leave the country. But for instance, a wife gets there finally to Canada, she starts the application, she gets approved. How easy would it be for her family to then rejoin once she has the status in Canada?
So once so the humanitarian application is only for people who are here. So if there are family members that are not in Canada, they are not going to be processed simultaneously. So once the person who is in Canada, if they get approval and they become permanent residents, so after they are PRs, then they could sponsor spouses, for example, to immigrate here. So it would be a separate sponsorship application.
Would that be 18 months again, right?
Sponsorship, if it's a spouse, it's about a year, sometimes even less if it's clear that there is no issue with genuineness. So in any sponsorship application for a spouse, the number one concern is always, is the marriage real, or is it entered into for purposes of getting status in Canada? If it's a long-term marriage, the couple has children, you know, there's no doubt about the marriage. It could be processed much faster than the 12 months. The 12 months is sort of a gauge that Canada Immigration says is an estimate that you can expect.
Okay.
So, and then if it's a family in Canada applying for humanitarian application, is the application for the family, or is it each individual?
The family, and by family I mean a couple, married or common law, and their dependent children, meaning under the age of 22. That will be one family unit. So it doesn't include like parents, it doesn't include nieces and nephews, just that nuclear family would be the family. So if there was like, you know, a family, a couple with children, and their parents were also here, the parents' application will be separate from the family's application.
Great. Okay, well.
That's a lot of information.
Yeah. Do you think you have room in your schedule to take on a new case? I mean,
yeah, that we certainly can. Yeah, so we've got a lot of staff who help with like the application forms and things, which are quite time consuming. So we can certainly take this on. And I would say start working on it sooner than later, just to get it in as quickly as possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Sounds
Awesome.
good.
Any other questions?
I think that's all. I guess like we'll talk amongst ourselves to figure out next steps, but we'll reach out to you and figure out
whenever you're ready. And I'll email once I find wherever this audio or video recording is. I will send you a link to it so you can download it for yourself, and then yeah, we can go from there.
Great. And you're fine with me sharing it with other people we've talked about today?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just
And
the
then-
only caveat I would put is each person's situation is going to be different. So, you know, and a humanitarian application is very fact-based. The general conditions in Ukraine right now are something that's going to be very helpful to a humanitarian application. But in terms of other options like, you know, the economic and so on, that would have to be an assessment that needs to be done to see whether that person would even be eligible or not. And they're going to have to do like language tests and education assessments, things that are going to take a long time and may not even be possible right now in Ukraine. So, yeah, and if there's any new programs that get announced, then we can certainly, you know, if there's facilitating work permits or something that gets announced for people who are here already, then we can certainly apply for those. They haven't, nothing concrete's been announced yet, though.
Perfect. And then you're fine with us, with me sharing your contact information with potentially some other people
Yeah,
who
of course.
might be
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah,
Great.
absolutely.
Thank
Okay.
you so-
You're
Really
very, very
appreciate
welcome. If there's anything else that you just didn't think to ask me and you want to ask me, just send me a quick email or we can schedule another call if necessary as well.
Okay.
Okay,
Sounds good.
thank
you so much.
Rekha.
You're very welcome. It was nice to meet you both.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you.
Bye.